your mother that lots of grocers are featuring Wheaties and bananas now. Ask her to get some of each next time she goes to the store. Try that delicious breakfast combination tomorrow morning. You'll say it's swell.
Have you tried Wheaties? They're whole wheat with all of the bran. Try Wheaties, for wheat is the best food of man. They're crispy and they're crunchy the whole year through. Jack Hansen never tried a than a beater with you. So just buy Wheaties, the best breakfast food in the land.
Good evening. It's often said that truth is stranger than fiction. And on a Halloween evening in 1938, America was scared silly by a particular radio station. Martians were invading New Jersey. 37 years later, the United States sent Viking 1 on its way, and the Earth invaded Mars. There was no panic among the Martians, no scary radio show depicting the invasion of Earthlings. As of tonight, no Martians at all were discovered, but the fact remains that Halloween will never quite be the same. Fictional Martians landed on Earth courtesy of Orson Welles, the Mercury Theater, and the Columbia Broadcasting System. We have never quite forgotten that famous radio invasion, the panic and the near panic that the all too realistic radio play caused. Tonight, join with me and our assembled cast as we recreate the story heard first on October 30th, 1938. Wells had his writer, a young Howard Koch, adapt H.G. Wells' turn-of-the-century novel for his radio troupe, the Mercury Theater of the Air. Now, Koch drew the basic idea from the story, but he changed its locale to modern America, and more important, to the East Coast, where CBS originated its broadcasts. Now, a few things to remember. Picture a nation that was struggling with a hangover of a global economic depression and facing the prospect of a Second World War. Hitler was rolling over Europe. Italy and Japan were annexing countries as well. Britain and France were looking to America to help stem the tide of Axis domination. But the United States was very cautious. Many clung to the principle and the policy of isolationism. After all, we had two oceans that were keeping our shores free. Still, the specter of war hung over the country. In homes across America, folks were listening more and more to their radios. The broadcast medium was relatively new, and as more and more programs went on the air, news and entertainment filled the days and nights with disembodied voices. Some presentations were plain, harmless entertainment. Others were factual, like the president's fireside chats. People from all walks of life listened and laughed and cried and believed what the little box in their living room said. So, sit back and close your eyes, if you like, as we journey back to an era before television and satellites and CNN. An innocent time of uneasy peace and total reliance on what the radio said. It's a Sunday evening in October, just before 8 p.m. in the New York broadcast studio. Director-actor Orson Welles is about to introduce his weekly dramatized story, to a listening audience out in the dark.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in a radio play by Howard Koch, suggested by the H.G. Wells novel, The War of the Worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which, by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet, across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 38th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crossley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radio.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We now take you to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza in New York City. We bring you the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of the Spanish, Ramon Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving towards the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you at the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
favor, the ever-popular Stardust, Ramon Raquello and his orchestra.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged for an interview with the noted astronomer Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. We are now ready to take you to Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton. I am standing in a large, semi-circular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. I ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during any delay that may arise during our interview. Besides his ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pearson may be interrupted by telephone or other communications. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
At any time, Mr. Phillips.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in a blue sea, transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be at a point nearest the Earth, in opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips, although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced as a scientist that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I should say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for these gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Mr. Phillips, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from the Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles.
Well, that seems a safe enough distance. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the National History Museum, New York, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We now return you to our New York studio.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Montreal, Canada. Professor Morse of McGill University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This confirms earlier reports received from the American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special announcement from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and will have our commentator, Mr. Phillips, give you a word description as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millinette and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music. We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again at the Wilmette Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin to paint for you a word picture of this strange scene before my eyes, like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me, half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. What I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. Not at least the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. It has a diameter of what would you say, Professor Pearson?
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of yellowish white. Curious spectators now are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. They're getting in front of my line of vision. Would you mind standing on one side, please?
One side there, one side.
While the policemen are pushing the crowd back, here's Mr. Wilmoth, owner of the farm here. He may have some interesting facts to add. Mr. Wilmoth, would you please tell the radio audience as much as you remember of the rather unusual visitor that dropped in your backyard? Step closer, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Wilmoth.
I was listening to the radio.
Closer and louder, please.
Pardon me.
Louder, please, and closer.
Yes, sir. While I was listening to the radio and kind of drowsing, that professor fellow was talking about Mars. So I was half dozing and half...
Yes, Mr. Wilmoth, then what happened?
As I was saying, I was listening to the radio kind of halfway.
Yes, Mr. Wilmoth, and then you saw something.
Not first thought. I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound. Like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
Then what?
Turned my head out the window and would have swore I was asleep and dreaming.
Yes.
I seen a kind of greenish streak. And then, zingo, something smacked the ground, knocked me clear out of my chair.
Well, were you frightened, Mr. Wilmoth?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was kind of riled.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmoth, thank you.
Want me to tell you some more?
No, that's quite all right. That'll be plenty. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard Mr. Wilmoth, owner of the farm where this thing has fallen. I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in a field in back of us. Police are trying to rope off the roadway leading into the farm, but it's no use. They're breaking right through. Their headlights throw an enormous spot on the pit where the object's half buried. Some of the more daring souls are venturing near the edge. Their silhouettes stand out against the metal sheen. One man wants to touch the thing. He's having an argument with the policeman. The policeman wins. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's something I haven't mentioned in all this excitement, but it's becoming more distinct. Perhaps you caught it already on your radio. Listen. Do you hear it? It's a curious humming sound that seems to come from inside the object. I'll move the microphone nearer. Here. Now we're not more than 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Oh, but Professor Pearson.
Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing?
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
Do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial, not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth and, as you can see, of cylindrical shape.
Just a minute. Something's happening, ladies and gentlemen. This is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw.
She's
the
a
thing
railbag!
must be hollow.
Keep back there! Keep those idiots back!
She's off! The top's loose! Look out there! Stand back!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling out of the hollow top. Someone or something I can see peering out of that black hole. Two luminous discs. Are they eyes? It might be a face. It might be. Oh, good heavens! Something is wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one and another. They look like tentacles to me. I can see the thing's body. It's as large as a bear, and it glistens like wet leather. But that face, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. The eyes they're black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. The monster, whatever it is, can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing is rising up. The crowd falls back. They've had enough. This is the most extraordinary experience. I can't find words. I'm pulling the microscope with me as the microphone as I talk. I'll have to stop this description until I've taken a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening at the Wilmeth Farms, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I out? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back at the stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmeth's garden. From here I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk, as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit, about 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain is conferring with someone. We can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted. The professor moves around one side, studying the object, while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole, a kind of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait, something's happening. A hot shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flames spraying from the mirror. It leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, good Lord! They're turning into flame. Oh, now the whole field's caught fire. The woods, the barns, the gas tanks of automobiles, it's spreading everywhere. Oh, it's coming this way about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return at that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner for the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just a moment. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the villages of Grover's Mill, their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
You have just been listening to General Montgomery Smith, commanding the state militia at Trenton. In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The strange creatures, after unleashing their deadly assault, crawled back into their pit and made no attempt to prevent the efforts of the firemen to recover the bodies and extinguish the fire. Combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. We have been unable to establish any contact with our mobile unit at Grover's Mill, but we hope to be able to return you there at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, we take you... just one moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that we have finally established communication with an eyewitness of the tragedy. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. As a scientist, he will give you his explanation of the calamity. The next voice you hear will be that of Professor Pearson, brought to you by direct wire. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. Of their destructive instrument, I might venture some conjectural explanation. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's all too evident that these creatures have scientific knowledge far in advance of our own. It is my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose, by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. That is my conjecture on the origin of the heat ray.
Thank you, Professor Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a bulletin from Trenton. It is a brief statement informing us that the charred body of Carl Phillips has been identified in a Trenton hospital. Now, here's another bulletin from Washington, D.C. Office of the Director of the National Red Cross reports 10 units of Red Cross emergency workers have been assigned to the headquarters of the state militia stationed outside of Grover Mill, New Jersey. Here's a bulletin from the state police. Princeton Junction. The fires at Grover's Mill and vicinity are now under control. Scouts report all quiet in the pit and no sign of life appearing from the mouth of the cylinder. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special statement from Mr. Harry McDonald, Vice President in charge of operations.
We have received a request from the militia at Trenton to place at their disposal our entire broadcasting facilities. In view of the gravity of the situation, and believing that radio has a definite responsibility to serve in the public interest at all times, we are turning over our facilities to the state militia at Trenton.
We take you now to the field headquarters of the state militia near Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
This is Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps, attached to the state militia now engaged in military operations in the vicinity of Grover's Mill. Situation arising from the reported presence of certain individuals of unidentified nature is now under complete control. The cylindrical object, which lies in a pit directly below our position, is surrounded on all sides by 8 battalions of infantry, without heavy field pieces, but adequately armed with rifles and machine guns. All cause for alarm, if such cause ever exists, is now entirely unjustified. The things, whatever they are, do not even venture to poke their heads above the pit. I can see their hiding place plainly in the glare of the searchlights here. With all the reported resources, these creatures can scarcely stand up against heavy machine gun fire. Anyway, it's an interesting outing for the troops. I can make out their khaki uniforms crossing back and forth in front of the lights. It looks almost like a real war. There appears to be some slight smoke in the woods bordering the Millstone River, probably fire started by campers. Well, we ought to see some action soon. One of the companies is deploying on the left flank, flank, and a quick thrust, and it'll be all over. No, wait a minute. I see something on top of the cylinder. No, it's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. No, wait, that wasn't a shadow. It's something moving, solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. It's going higher and higher. Why, it's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of a metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees, and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight at Grover's Mill has ended in one of the most startling defeats ever suffered by an army in modern times. 7,000 men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine of the invaders from Mars. 120 known survivors. The rest strewn over the battle area from Grover's Mill to Plainsboro, crushed and trampled to death under the metal feet of the monster, or burned to cinders by its heat ray. The monster is now in control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center. Communication lines are down from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean. Railroad tracks are torn and service from New York to Philadelphia discontinued, except routing some trains through Allentown and Phoenixville. Highways to the north, south, and west are clogged with frantic human traffic. Police and Army reserves are unable to control the mad flight. By morning, the fugitives will have swelled Philadelphia, Camden, and Trenton. It is estimated to twice their normal population. At this time, martial law prevails throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. We take you now to Washington for a special broadcast on this national emergency. The Secretary of the Interior.
Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country, nor the concern of your government in protecting the lives and property of its people. However, I wish to impress upon you, private citizens and public officials, all of you, the urgent need of calm and resourceful action. Fortunately, this formidable enemy is still confined to a comparatively small area, and we may place our faith in the military forces to keep them there. In the meantime, placing our faith in God, we must continue the performance of our duties, each and every one of us, so that we may confront this destructive adversary with a nation united, courageous, and consecrated to the preservation of human supremacy on this earth. I thank you.
You have just heard the Secretary of the Interior speaking from Washington. Bulletins too numerous to read are piling up in the studio here. We are informed that the central portion of New Jersey is blacked out from radio communication due to the effect of the heat ray upon power lines and electrical equipment. Here is a special bulletin from New York. Cables received from English, French, German scientific bodies offering assistance. Astronomers report continued gas outbursts at regular intervals on the planet Mars. Majority voice opinion that enemy will be reinforced by additional rocket machines. Attempts made to locate Professor Pearson of Princeton, who has observed Martians at close range, have failed. It is feared he was lost in a recent battle. Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report 3 Martian machines visible above the treetops, moving north towards Somerville, with population fleeing ahead of them. Heat ray not in use. Although advancing at express train speed, invaders pick their way carefully. They seem to be making conscious effort to avoid destruction of cities and countryside. However, they stop to uproot power lines, bridges, and railroad tracks. Their apparent objective is to crush resistance, paralyze communication, and disorganize human society. Here is a bulletin from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Coon hunters have stumbled on a second cylinder similar to the first embedded in the Great Swamp 20 miles south of Morristown. U.S. Army field pieces are proceeding from Newark to blow up the second invading unit before cylinder can be opened and fighting machine rigged. They are taking up position in the foothills of the Washoe Mountains. Another bulletin from Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report enemy machines, now 3 in number, increasing speed northward, kicking over houses and trees in their evident haste to form a conjunction with their allies south of Morristown. Machines also sighted by telephone operator east of Middlesex within 10 miles of Plainfield. Here's a bulletin from Winstonfield, Long Island. Fleet of Army bombers carrying heavy explosives flying north in pursuit of enemy. Scouting planes act as guides. They keep speeding enemy in sight. Just a moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we've run special wires to the artillery line and adjacent villages to give you direct reports in the zone of the advancing enemy. First, we take you to the battery of the 22nd Field Artillery, located in the Watchuk Mountains.
Range, 32 meters.
32 meters.
Projection, 39 degrees.
39 degrees.
Fire!
140 yards to the right, sir.
Shift range, 31 meters.
31 meters.
Projection, 37 degrees.
37 degrees.
Fire!
A hit, sir. We've got the tripod of one of them. They've stopped. The others are trying to repair it.
Quick, get the range. Shift, 30 meters.
30 meters.
Projection, 27 degrees.
27 degrees.
Fire!
Can't see the shell land, sir. They're letting off some kind of smoke.
What is it?
Black smoke, sir, moving this way. Lying real close to the ground. It's moving fast.
Put on gas masks. Get ready to fire. Shift to 24 meters.
24 meters.
Projection, 24 degrees.
24 degrees.
Fire!
Still can't see it, sir. The smoke's coming nearer.
Get the range. 23 meters.
23 meters.
Projection, 22 degrees.
22 degrees, sir.
Army bombing plane D-843 off Bayonne, New Jersey. Lieutenant Boyd commanding 8 bombers. Reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. This is Boyd reporting to Commander Fairfax, Langham Field. Enemy tripod machines now in sight. Reinforced by 3 machines from the Morristown cylinder. 6 altogether. 1 machine partially crippled. Believed hit by shell from Army gun in Watchung Mountains. Guns now appear silent. A heavy black fog hanging close to the earth of extreme density, nature unknown. No sign of heat ray. Enemy now turns east, crossing Passaic River into the Jersey marshes. Another straddles the Pulaski Skyway. Evident objective is New York City. They're pushing down a high-tension power station. Machines are close together now, and we're ready to attack. Plane circling, ready to strike. 1,000 yards will be over the first. 800 yards. 600. 400. 200. There they go!
The giant arm raised! Green flash! They're spraying us with flame! 2,000 feet! Engines are giving out! No chance to respond, only one thing left! Drop bomb them, plane it all! We're diving in on the first one! Now the engine's gone! 8, 7...
This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field. Come in, please. Come in, please.
This is Langham Field. Go ahead.
8 Army bombers in engagement with enemy tripod machines over Jersey Flats. Engines incapacitated by heat ray. All crashed. 1 enemy machine destroyed. Enemy now discharging heavy black smoke in direction of...
This is Newark, New Jersey. This is Newark, New Jersey. Warning. Poisonous black smoke pouring in from Jersey marshes. Reaches South Street. Gas masks useless. Urge population to move into open spaces. Automobiles use routes 7,
23, 24. Avoid congested areas. The smoke now spreading over Raymond Boulevard.
(2X2L), calling CQ. 2X2L, calling CQ. 2X2L, calling 8X3R. Come in, please.
This is 8X3R, coming back at 2X2L.
How's reception? How's reception? K, please. Where are you, 8X3R? What's the matter? Where are you?
I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as the Martians approach. Estimated in last 2 hours, 3 million people have moved out along the roads to the north. Hutchison River Parkway still kept open for motor traffic. Avoid bridges to Long Island, hopelessly jammed. All communication with Jersey Shore closed 10 minutes ago. No more defenses, our army wiped out. Artillery, Air Force, everything wiped out. This may be the last broadcast. We'll stay here to the end. People are holding service below us in the cathedral. Now I look down the harbor. All manner of boats, overloaded with fleeing population, pulling out from docks. Streets are all jammed. Noise and crowds like New Year's Eve in city. Wait a minute. Enemy now in sight above the Palisades. 5 great machines. First one is crossing river. I can see it from here, wading the Hudson like a man wading through a brook. A bulletin's handed me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside Buffalo, one in Chicago. St. Louis seem to be timed and spaced. Now the first machine reaches the shore. He stands watching, looking over the city. His steel, cowlish head is even with the skyscrapers. He waits for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out. Black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running towards the East River, thousands of them dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
(2X2L), calling CQ. 2X2L, calling CQ. 2X2L, calling CQ. New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
As I set down these notes on paper, I'm obsessed by the thought that I may be the last living man on Earth. I've been hiding in this empty house near Grover's Mill, a small island of daylight cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. All that happened before the arrival of these monstrous creatures in the world now seems part of another life, a life that has no continuity with the present. Furtive existence of the lonely derelict who pencils these words on the back of some astronomical notes bearing the signature of Richard Pearson. I look down at my blackened hands, my torn shoes, my tattered clothes, and I try to connect them with a professor who lives at Princeton, and who, on the night of October 30th, glimpsed through his telescope an orange splash of light on a distant planet. My wife, my colleagues, my students, my books, my observatory, my world. Where are they? Did they ever exist? Am I Richard Pearson? What day is it? Do days exist without calendars? Does time pass when there are no human hands left to wind the clocks? In writing down my daily life, I tell myself I shall preserve human history between the pages of this little book that was meant to record the movements of the stars. But to write, I must live. And to live, I must eat. I find moldy bread in the kitchen, and an orange not too spoiled to swallow. I keep watch at the window. From time to time I catch sight of a Martian above the black smoke. The smoke still holds the house in its black coil. But at length there is a hissing sound, and suddenly I see a Martian mounted on his machine, spraying the air with a jet of steam as if to dissipate the smoke. I watch in a corner as his huge metal legs nearly brush against the house. Exhausted by terror, I fall asleep. It's morning. Sun streams in the window. The black cloud of gas has lifted, and the scorched meadows to the north look as though a black snowstorm has passed over them. I venture from the house. I make my way to a road. No traffic. Here and there a wrecked car, baggage overturned, a blackened skeleton. I push on north. For some reason I feel safer trailing these monsters than running away from them. And I keep a careful watch. I have seen the Martians feed. Should one of their machines appear over the top of trees, I'm ready to fling myself flat on the earth. I come to a chestnut tree. October. Chestnuts are ripe. I fill my pockets. I must keep alive. 2 days I wander in a vague northerly direction through a desolate world. Finally I notice a living creature, a small red squirrel in a beech tree. I stare at him in wonder. He stares back at me. I believe at that moment the animal and I shared the same emotion, the joy of finding another living being. I push on north. I find dead cows in a brackish field. Beyond, the charred ruins of a dairy. The silo remains standing guard over the wasteland like a lighthouse deserted by the sea. Astride the silo perches a weathercock. The arrow points north. Next day I came to a city vaguely familiar in its contours, yet its buildings strangely dwarfed and leveled off, as if a giant had sliced off its highest towers with a capricious sweep of his hand. I reached the outskirts. I found Newark, undemolished, but humbled by some whim of the advancing Martians. Presently, with an odd feeling of being watched, I caught sight of something crouching in a doorway. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man armed with a large knife.
Stop! Where did you come from?
I come from many places. A long time ago, from Princeton.
Princeton, huh? That's near Grover's Mill.
Yes.
Grover's Mill. There's no food here. This is my country. All of this end of town down to the river. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?
I don't know. I guess I'm looking for people.
What was that? Did you hear something just then?
Only a bird. A live bird.
Get to know the birds have shadows these days. Say, we're in the open here. Let's crawl into a doorway and talk.
Have you seen any Martians?
They've gone over to New York. At night the sky is alive with their lights. Just as if people were still living in it. By daylight you can't see them. 5 days ago a couple of them carried something big across the flats from the airport. I believe they're learning how to fly.
Fly?
Yeah, fly.
Then it's all over with humanity. Stranger, there's still you and I. 2 of us left.
They got themselves in solid. They wrecked the greatest country in the world. Those green stars, they're probably falling somewhere every night. They've only lost one machine. There isn't anything we can do. We're done. We're licked.
Where were you? You're in a uniform.
What's left of it? I was in the militia. National Guard. That's good. Wasn't any war any more than there's war between men and ants.
And we're edible ants. I found that out. What will they do to us?
I thought it all out. Right now we're caught as we're wanted. Martian only has to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. But they won't keep doing that. They'll begin catching us systematic like. Keeping the best and storing us in cages and things. They haven't begun on us yet.
Not begun?
Not begun. All that's happened so far is because we don't have sense enough to keep quiet. Bothering them with guns and such stuff and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds. Now, instead of our rushing around blind, we've got to fix ourselves up according to the way things are now. Cities, nations, civilization, progress, done.
But if that's so, what is there to live for?
Oh, there won't be any more concerts for 1,000,000 years or so. No nice little dinners at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I guess the game is up.
And what is there left?
Life, that's what. I want to live, and so do you. We're not going to be exterminated, and I don't mean to be caught either. Tamed, and fattened, and bred like an ox.
What are you going to do?
I'm going on. Right under their feet. I got a plan. We men as men are finished. We don't know enough. We gotta learn plenty before we get a chance. We gotta live and keep free while we learn. I thought it all out, see?
Tell me the rest.
Well, it isn't all of us who are made for wild beasts, and that's what it's got to be. And that's why I watched you. All these little office workers that used to live in these houses, they'd be no good. They haven't any stuff to them. They just used to run off to work. I've seen hundreds of them, running wild to catch their commuter train in the morning for fear they'd get canned if they didn't, running back at night because they were afraid they wouldn't be home in time for dinner, lives insured and a little invested in case of accidents, and on Sundays, worried about the hereafter. The Martians will be a godsend to those guys. Nice roomy cages, good food, careful breeding, no worries. After a week or so chasing around the fields on empty stomachs, they'll come and be glad to be caught.
You've thought it all out, haven't you?
You bet I have. And that's not all. These Martians will make pets of some of them. Train them to do tricks. Who knows? Get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed. Some maybe they'll train to hunt us.
No. No, that's impossible. No human being.
Yes, they will. There's men who do it gladly. If one of them ever came after me.
In the meantime, you and I and others like us, where are we to live while the Martians own the Earth?
Got it all figured out. We'll live underground. I've been thinking about the sewers. Under New York, there are miles and miles of them. The main ones are big enough for anybody. And there's cellars, vaults, underground storerooms, railway tunnels, subways. You begin to see, huh? We had a bunch of us strong men together. No weak ones. That rubbish out.
And you meant me to go?
Well, I gave you a chance, didn't I?
We won't quarrel about that. Go on.
And you gotta make safe places for us to stay and see, and get all the books we can. Science books. That's where men like you come in, see? And we'll raid the museums. Spy on the Martians. May not be so much we have to learn before. Just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their own fighting machines suddenly start off. Heat rays right and left, and not a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, but men. Men who've learned the way how. May even be in our time. Gee, imagine having one of them lovely things with its heat wave ride and free. We turn it on Martians. We turn it on men. We'd bring everybody down to their knees.
That's your plan?
You and me and a few more of us. We'd own the world.
Let's see.
Say, what's the matter? Where are you going?
Not to your world. Goodbye, stranger. After parting with the artilleryman, I came at last to the Holland Tunnel. I entered that silent tube, anxious to know the fate of the great city on the other side of the Hudson. Cautiously, I came out of the tunnel and made my way up Canal Street. I reached 14th Street, and there again were black powder and several bodies, and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I wandered up through the 30s and 40s. I stood alone on Times Square. I caught sight of a lean dog running down 7th Avenue with a piece of dark brown meat in his jaws and a pack of starving mongrels at his heels. He made a wide circle around me as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. I walked up Broadway in the direction of that strange powder, past silent shop windows displaying their mute wares to empty sidewalks, past the Capitol Theater, silent, dark, past a shooting gallery where a row of empty guns faced an arrested line of wooden ducks. Near Columbus Circle I noticed models of 1939 motor cars in the showrooms facing empty streets. From over the top of the General Motors building, I watched a flock of black birds circling in the sky. I hurried on. Suddenly I caught sight of the hood of a Martian machine standing somewhere in Central Park, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. An insane idea! I rushed recklessly across Columbus Circle and into the park. I climbed a small hill above the pond at 60th Street. From there I could see, standing in a silent row along the mall, 19 of those great metal titans, their cowls empty, their steel arms hanging listlessly by their sides. I looked in vain for the monsters that inhabit those machines. Suddenly my eyes were attracted to the immense flock of blackbirds that hovered directly below me. They circled to the ground, and there before my eyes, stark and silent, lay the Martians, with the hungry birds pecking and tearing brown shreds of flesh from their dead bodies. Later, when their bodies were examined in laboratories, it was found that they were killed by the putrefactive and diseased bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain, after all men's defenses had failed, by the humblest thing that God in his wisdom put upon this earth. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. Dim and wonderful is the vision I had conjured up in the mind that life spread slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout all the inanimate vastness of sidereal space. But that is a remote dream. It may be that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve. To them, and not to us, is the future ordained, perhaps. Strange it now seems to sit in my peaceful study at Princeton, writing down this last chapter of the record begun at a deserted farm in Grover's Mill. Strange to see from my window the university spires, dim and blue through an April haze. Strange to watch children playing in the streets. Strange to see young people strolling on the green, where the new spring grass heals the last black scars of a bruised earth. Strange to watch the sightseers enter the museum, where the dissembled parts of a Martian machine are kept on public view. Strange when I recall the time when I first saw it, bright and clean cut, hard and silent, under the dawn of that last great day. This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night. So we did the next best thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the Columbia Broadcasting System. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch. And if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, That was no Martian. It's Halloween.
Tonight, the Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations coast to coast have brought you The War of the World by H.G. Wells, the 17th in its weekly series of dramatic broadcasts featuring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air. Next week, we present a dramatization of 3 famous short stories. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Our play is over, but the reactions were just beginning to happen. What happened to that listening audience that eagerly heard this broadcast? How did the population react to a fictional radio drama about an alien invasion? Some interesting questions that we will answer in part 2. In the meantime, enjoy some refreshments and ponder how you would have reacted in 1938. We shall return shortly.
Are you all situated there?
As long as no one doesn't.
Hold on, I'm here.
It's still on.
Looks like it's still on. Yeah. Is it not?
The movie. What date is
For days following the Martian broadcast, headlines screamed and newspapers around the world tried to recreate the atmosphere of terror that spread over America on that October night. Years later, a New York Times editor wrote,
"The panic came in the night. Here, there, and everywhere, people suddenly dropped to their knees and began to moan and babble. Housewives wept, tore their hair, and fell into swoons. Grown men wept too and dashed about the streets. College boys trembled and prayed. Telephone lines were clogged with calls. In a few hours more, the Red Cross and the National Guard would have had to be mobilized."
Stories of individual experiences are recounted like memories of those who have lived through an actual war. A mother living in a crowded New Jersey tenement.
When I tuned in, the weather reports were given. I was with my little boy. My husband had gone to the movies, and I thought it was all up with us. I just grabbed my boy and sat there and cried.
A Warner Brothers studio executive.
My wife and I were driving through the redwood forest in Northern California. At first it was New Jersey, but soon the things were landing all over. There was no escape. All we could think of was to get back to Los Angeles to see our children once more. In the middle of that forest, I forgot we were low on gas, and it ran out. We sat there, holding hands, expecting to see those Martian monsters appear over the treetops. When Orson said it was a Halloween prank, it was like being reprieved on the way to the gas chamber.
Some stories had their humorous aspect. This account from a young college student.
My girlfriend and I were at a party. Someone turned on the radio. It was just when the Martians were spraying people at Grover's Mill with the heat ray. At first we couldn't believe it was happening, but it was so real we stayed glued to the radio, getting more scared every minute. My girl wanted to be with her family. I drove like crazy up 6th Avenue. I don't know how fast. I didn't care if I got a ticket. It was all over anyway. My apartment was on the way, so I stopped just long enough to rush in and shout out to my father that the Martians had landed and we were all going to be killed and I was taking my girl home. When we got to her place, her parents were waiting for us. My father had called them, told them to hold me there until he could send a doctor as I had gone out of my mind.
And one letter addressed to Orson from an uneducated laborer.
When those things landed, I thought the best thing to do was to go away. So I took $3.25 out of my savings and bought a ticket. After I'd gone 60 miles, I heard it was a play. Now I don't have any money left for the shoes I was saving up for. Would you please have someone send me a pair of black shoes, size 9B?
Orson and John Hausman bought him his shoes. And some others.
I woke up my nephew and looked in the icebox, saw some chicken I'd left there from Sunday dinner, and I was saving for Monday night. I said to myself, my nephew, we may as well eat this chicken. We're not going to be here in the morning.
The broadcast had us all worried, but I knew it would scare at least 10 years' life out of my mother-in-law.
My only thought was delight that if the Martians had come to Shelton, I wouldn't have to pay the butcher's bill. Wife to husband, Dan, why don't you get dressed? You don't want to die in your working clothes.
During and after the broadcast, frantic telephone calls flooded the switchboards of radio stations, newspapers, and police headquarters.
Some radio stations reported increases as much as 500% over the usual Sunday night volume.
Naturally, it was CBS that received the full impact. Mercury Theater co-founder and producer John Hausman was there.
At the beginning of the second half, about 8:32 p.m., Davidson Taylor, CBS broadcast supervisor, received a phone call in the control room, creased his lips, and hurriedly left the studio. To us in the studio, the show seemed to be progressing splendidly. How splendidly Taylor had just learned outside. For several minutes now, a kind of madness seemed to be sweeping the continent, somehow connected with our show. From outside sources, vague rumors were coming in of deaths and suicides and panic injuries. During the final musical theme, a call on control room phone brought the shrill voice of a Midwestern city mayor screaming for Wells. Choking with fury, he reports mobs in the streets, women and children huddled in churches, violence and looting. Orson hangs up quickly. Off the air, the studio door bursts open, the building suddenly full of people in blue uniforms. We are hurried out of the studio, downstairs into a back office. Network employees are busily collecting, destroying, or locking up all scripts and records of the broadcast. Hours later, they let us out a back way. It is surprising to see life going on as usual in the city streets.
The brunt of the public outcry fell on Orson. For days he was pursued by reporters and threatened by outraged citizens.
Lawsuits for injuries and damages were filed against CBS and the Mercury Theater. None came to trial, since there was no precedent for such actions under these circumstances.
As the shock was absorbed and the excitement died down, the tide of public opinion reversed itself. Mail continued to pour in to radio stations, but the vast majority were favorable, even congratulatory.
In the course of 45 minutes of actual time, the invading Martians were able to blast off from their planet, land on the Earth, set up their destructive machines, defeat our army, disrupt communications, demoralize the population, and occupy whole sections of the country in 45 minutes. Adapter Howard Koch states,
I was a young playwright, doing my first professional job, writing radio plays for the Mercury Theater, built around the name and talents of Orson Welles. Each week I was responsible for 60 pages of script, dramatizing some literary work, usually a novel or a short story that was assigned to me. Sunday, noon, Orson took over and worked his particular magic with the script that I'd slaved over and for which I was paid the lordly sum of $75. 24 hours after the broadcast, the fates of all of us hung in the balance. The public couldn't make up its collective mind whether we were heroes or villains. While there were numerous injuries, miraculously no one actually died in the mad scramble to escape the Martians, although one woman was reported in the act of taking poison, but stopped in time by her husband. Then, Dorothy Thompson, in her influence column, gave the opinion,
"We have done the country a service by showing how vulnerable we are to a panic reaction in event of war."
From that time on, the tide turned in our favor, and the course of all our lives was changed forever.
And what of the Martians, those formidable beings let loose on the world in 1938, and subsequent UFO sightings?
Imaginary or otherwise, UFO sightings have been reported in various parts of the world. From the earliest sightings, the United States Air Force has denied the existence of flying objects. Possibly, mindful of the panic caused by the Martian broadcast, they want to avoid a repetition.
Understandably, they are anxious to reassure us that nothing exists in this world which is not in their power to cope with.
We found that the under control pronouncements of the scientists, the military men, and the Secretary of the Interior in the radio script only succeeded in convincing the listening audience that the truth was being withheld, and that the invaders were indeed Martians, invincible, and bent on our destruction.
As a people, we suffer from xenophobia, fear of anything alien, which accounts for many of our racial and national prejudices against those whose color or religion or economic system is different from ours.
We tend to assign to others our fears and aggressions. Hence it was natural for the Michigan farmer, who believing he saw a Martian flying machine hovering over a swamp on his land, ran to his house for a shotgun, instead making a more hospitable gesture.
If our radio play had portrayed the Martians as arrivals on a friendly mission, our audience would have been less ready to accept the drama as something actually happening.
Yet why shouldn't a creature evolved enough to span the galaxies be intelligent enough to share a peaceful existence with other beings? They may even help to save us from ourselves.
Thank you for joining us for this recreation of the broadcast that changed our perceptions of entertainment and the news. Happy Halloween to the War of the Worlds, a 55-year-old legend. Housewives? Now it's your turn.
I have to?
You don't have to if you don't want to. We would like to find out from you what your reactions were to that broadcast if you heard it in 1938. Or if you know of somebody else who heard that on Halloween and told you about what happened. We would like to hear from you. Can you share that with us? Anybody out there brave enough who heard that?
I wasn't live then. I'm sorry.
What?
She thought I was old enough to have been live then. I'm not.
Oh, you weren't old enough.
Close, but not quite.
Not quite. Obviously not all our cast was either. Anybody hear that program? Well, I guess not. Yes.
I have a tape of it, and I listened to it this afternoon. It was very, very authentic.
Good, thank
Tape
you.
for this.
Do you have any questions about Howard Koch or any of the people who were involved in this program?
The lady there.
Just listening to the time frame, knowing what happened, if you just listened, you know it can't happen that fast. And so all I can think of is maybe the besides, you know, mass hysteria. There was a time frame that was happening, and it happened in a short amount of time, and that all couldn't have taken place.
No.
And it's hard for me to believe that it would happen. But then if you see other things that have happened now through TV, I can imagine that.
Jeff, would you like to explain about that? What was happening with the radio at that time?
The program that you heard tonight was up against, in its time period, a very popular program, the Edgar Bergen Charlie McCarthy Show. And people switched dials just like we zap at our TV set. So they switched over from NBC, which was the kingpin in those days, to the up-and-coming CBS network. And they heard the bulletins that Mitch read tonight and some of the rest of us. That's what they ended up hearing. They did not get the beginning of the show. They didn't listen for probably about the first 15 minutes because there was a comedy sketch on with Mr. Bergen. And by the time people stopped listening to the radio, it had formulated in their mind already that the Martians were in Newark, they were in New Jersey, they were at Grover's Mill, they were heat raying right and left, they were, you know. And Ray tonight read the Secretary of the Interior. So that made it sound so official, because that's one of the goals that they had in mind when they wrote the adaptation, that people believed it. And they didn't wait around for the station identification at the half hour or for the end. And you heard some of the reactions tonight that we read you, as far as the people rushing around and thinking, well, it's all over, you know, might as well pack it up, because they just did not listen. Nor did they switch back to NBC to see if they had picked up on it, like we would have, you know. Well, Channel 7's got the fire, let's go take a look at Channel 4. So they didn't do that, they just went headlong. Yes?
I just would like to share a thought. You know, it's easy for us at this point to look back and think upon them as being rather naive or perhaps unintelligent. But yet most of us here remember when human beings went to the moon in 1969. And yet that whole thing could have been in the back lot of Warner Brothers for all that we know. And there are a lot of people...
They didn't tell you?
I always was suspicious about it.
No such thing as moon rocks.
No, it is truly amazing, though, that now that we have television and we have videos and we have movies and we spend so much time doing that, we don't remember that back in those days they didn't have all of the visuals that we have now. So when you sat in front of the radio and you listened, it's the same as when you read. You form your own pictures of what's going on, and in everyone's mind it became extremely viable that this was actually going on.
And even more powerful than TV because of that.
Because you make your own images.
Yes.
You make your own. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And the medium was you know, fairly new as far as the history goes of broadcasting. And it seems to me that people, you know, when you have technology like that for the first time, we take it for granted now. Back then, they probably thought for sure everything that came over those airways had to be real.
Was gospel.
Had to be.
Particularly when it sounded exactly like the news reports of the day, when if you were listening to the radio at the time, like Joyce explained at the very beginning in her preface, that there was a war scare on. You know, we were trying to be isolationists in '38, but Hitler was rolling over countries right and left, and this bothered, you know, Americans, particularly if they had family members or new people in the old country. So the aspect of news and newsreels and seeing it either in the movies or listening to it in the radio was very much a part of their daily lives by now. FDR was on, like, you know, every so often giving fireside chats. You know, this became a very important article in the House as far as their communication level, because if they didn't go to the movies and see the newsreels, they heard it on the radio, or they heard it from a neighbor, which is how a lot of it, you know, spread. Oh, by the way, did you hear the Martians are in Newark? Okay, quick, let's get in the car. So that, you know, that was the kind of mindset that was going on at that time. Anything else?
Only as a side, the fact that we had to use our own imaginations and form our own images, I think probably was much better for us growing up as children. And rather than having the television giving you pictures, I think it helped us in our learning much better in education.
Certainly on the imagination level, I agree. That's what drew us to this work, because all of us, I think, once we got into it, and Bob asked us, he's the kingpin. Mr. Director's right over there. Why don't you take it back? Great! board because of the excitement of doing something like this, a recreation of a radio program that hasn't been heard, except in tapes and records and whatever, for such a long time.
I'd be interested in any reaction you might have to how you responded to seeing us when we weren't at the mics, tending to sort of be bored or preoccupied or whatever. I was doing a crossword, another guy was doing a racing farm, and
well, I was surprised at the fact that you were able to follow along in the story while you were doing that crossword puzzle. That's a talent.
Sheer talent.
Was it distracting? Did it add the
It seemed rather authentic. I mean, that would be the way that the crew
They were used to doing
It's what they did. They would come in at the drop of a hat, they'd pick up a script, and boy, they'd be right there. They'd finish it, and go down, they'd wait for their next
Somebody
cue.
points to you, and that's when you get up
That's
and
it.
do your piece.
This was you're concentrating on the crossword puzzle. How do you know somebody's pointing to you?
Oh, you know when your cue is coming up. That's what you got paid for.
You tended the business when you needed to.
Absolutely.
These were pros.
We've been doing it for a week.
I'm curious, today when there's a major reenactment of a dramatization, we read about it, or there's usually a newspaper review, there's some pre-release information. I just wonder if those days, if they held back on this particular one, or if that existed at all in those days.
They announced in the radio listings, usually in the newspaper, they weren't very sophisticated in those days, of course, that the Mercury Theater on the Air probably was doing War of the Worlds or Invaders from Mars, because that was its alternate title. But that's all it said. So, and I think they swung more toward the invasion from Mars aspect, because war was a bad word. You didn't say the W word, because everybody was on the edge of, quakiness on it. So, it was more like Invaders from Mars was perhaps the title, if the newspaper listed it at all, other than your regular radio log, which said Charlie McCarthy, Edgar Bergen show at 8 o'clock on NBC, and Mercury Theater on the Air on CBS. So that was about it. It isn't like today where we get whole long descriptions of what movie's playing or what episode Barry Mason's doing. Or
they were short on trailers in '38.
Yeah. They would have promoted it just like you heard tonight with the sign-off, where the announcer comes in and says, next week we'll be doing a series of 3 short stories or whatever. And that's how they would promo. If you listen to some old radio shows, they would do that even on the variety shows, say Edgar Bergen show or Bob Hope or one of those. They'd say, next week we'll have Judy Garland on, So that enticed people to go, oh yeah, well next week I'll have to listen to that. And they were very faithful. Once you had a listener, they were usually right there listening. Except for the people that didn't want to hear the singer on the Edgar Bergen show, which probably meant quite a bit to Orson, because he played all the publicity up real good. Real good.
you might be interested in knowing that as we've been in rehearsal for a whole week, that Jim has taken on more and more of the persona.
Yes. He's feeling the part. He's going to go to Hollywood and produce Citizen Kane 2. Yeah, the later years. He comes back. So, we're looking forward to that, Jim.
Anything else? Yes.
I just wanted to ask about the legal things that they mentioned. They ever actually get to court and they were thrown out as no precedents, or they just couldn't find anything?
They didn't go that far. They did not go that far. As we spoke up here, the tide actually began turning after the columnist and after people began sorting through and deciding, hey, we were fooled. We need to be more careful about this. There were all manner of other editorials that were accusatory and yet weren't. There was a tide of publicity that came in, pro and con, to CBS. CBS was about ready to skin Orson and fire everybody. But about 4 or 5 days after this, they began going, yeah, this could be a good thing. You know, not that they were going to go out and scare the world again the following Sunday night at 8 o'clock, but that it could put them in good stead as far as their ratings. Remember, they thought about those just like, you know, the broadcasters do today. And so no, nothing went to trial all that way, because although suits were threatened and, you know, brought up and legal teams were formed, nothing happened. They didn't take it that far.
Interestingly enough, though, it was the forebearer of the disclaimer
Yes.
on radio and TV, and that's why you get these at certain breaks when they are running something like this. This is only a test. That sort of phrase has now been added in specific places, specifically because of this broadcast.
Yeah, don't try this.
Cross the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much for coming and joining with us to recreate this, and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you.